Welcome to another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson, founder of Teach the Geek. It's an online platform for science and engineering professionals. Consider checking out the Teach the Geek to Speak Society. It's a monthly membership where you can get ongoing support in your public speaking journey. And you can learn more about it at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Today, my guest is Dr. Mary Kinsella. She's the founder of Her Engineering Career, working with female engineers so they can command greater influence and impact. She worked for years as an engineer before striking out on her own. She's also host of the Her Engineering Career podcast. I'm always keen on talking to engineers who started their own businesses, kind of like myself. So I really want to learn more about her motivation to go out on her own, her previous life as an engineer, and the takeaways she hopes people get from her podcast. Welcome to Teach the Geek interviews, Dr. Kinsella.
Thank you, Neil. Happy to be here.
So from the bit of research I did on you, I saw that you studied manufacturing technology, and I must admit, I have no clue what that means. So what is manufacturing technology and what was the motivation to study it?
Well, I'll start with the motivation part of it. I really didn't know what I wanted to do in college. I didn't know what I wanted to do in my career. And I didn't know what engineering was. And all I knew is that I wanted to do something related to science and math. And I actually started in architecture school, but that wasn't for me. And I came across this applied science major called manufacturing technology. And really what it is learning all about manufacturing processes and manufacturing organizations and how they work in the world. And it's a technology degree rather than an engineering degree. So the kinds of things you can do with that degree include supervisory type positions or lab tech type of positions, manufacturing techs, and that sort of thing.
Okay. Well, kind of like yourself, I really didn't know much about engineering when I was coming out of high school. I didn't start off in architecture though, so we have that not in common, but I ended up going into engineering because my father said I should. And then that's kind of how it all came about. And I used to lie about that too, because I was embarrassed by it. Because oftentimes you hear people talk about their motivation to go into engineering, it'd always be something more, I don't know, noble. Like they always had this interest. Like since I was 5 years old, I knew I wanted to be an engineer. It's like when I was 5 years old, I didn't know what an engineer was. When I was 15, I really didn't know what an engineer was. So I certainly didn't know at 5. But it's worked out okay so far. So I also noticed that you got a master's degree in materials engineering. So what was the motivation for that?
After my undergrad, I worked in manufacturing technology as a supervisor in microelectronics, actually, for a few years. But then I transitioned over to government R&D, and I worked for the Air Force Research Lab, which was kind of a culture shock, moving from manufacturing to government R&D. But I found a job in materials and manufacturing technology. And so it was encouraged by the lab to get advanced degrees. And of course, a materials engineering degree would make sense in the area where I was working, and that would help me with my future career. So that's what my motivation was. And plus, I could get reimbursed for my coursework, which I did. And in the last semester, I was able to actually work or go to school full time and be paid to do that. And that was an excellent program that they had at the Air Force Research Lab. So that was my motivation, and it was a good move for me because it helped open some more doors for me in the lab as my career progressed.
All right. So now you have a degree in manufacturing technology. You worked for a while. Eventually, you get a job in government R&D and are encouraged to get a master or a graduate degree. You get a master's in materials engineering, but you weren't done there. You went for the trifecta. You got a PhD in industrial and systems engineering. So what was the motivation to get that degree?
Well, that degree I did actually much later. And it wasn't something that I planned. Most of my career was not planned. I kind of followed where the opportunities took me. But I reached a point where I had just finished managing a big influential program, and I didn't know what I wanted to do next. And it was sort of a stopping point for me to reevaluate, what should I do now? And one of the options was to go back to school and get a PhD. And since I worked in a lab, a PhD is a valuable thing to have. And again, it opens more doors for you. So that's what I decided to do. I went into industrial and systems engineering because it was very similar to the area I was working in. And I was able to do research that was related to rapid prototyping, which was the precursor for additive manufacturing. This is something I got into later.
The PhD, was that something you did on a full-time basis, or did you do it part-time?
I was able to get into a program through the Air Force called long-term full-time training. So they paid me to go to school and take my classwork and actually do the research. And I was able to get most of that done full-time, paid for by the Air Force. And then I came back to work and finished up my dissertation and my defense, et cetera. So that worked out really well for me because I could focus on my work, of course, but also it gave my husband and I a lot of flexibility because we had 2 young children at the time. And so I could sort of release my job responsibilities for a little while, focus on school, and have a little more flexible schedule.
Gotcha.
And it worked out really well. I don't think I would have done it otherwise if I didn't have that program.
I'm interested when I hear people that have worked for a while and then they go back to school for such a degree, because oftentimes when I hear about PhDs, these are people that they do their PhDs not too long after finishing their undergraduate degrees. So they don't get used to making money. But it's really difficult. I would think it'd be really difficult to go to getting from having a job where you make good money to then being a PhD student. At least how I understand PhDs is, you live off a stipend. Maybe you have to do some TAing, teaching classes. It's not a whole lot of money to make. So it seems like a big, you talked about culture shock going from manufacturing technology to government R&D. I would think it'd be a culture shock from going from being a well-paid employee to a graduate student.
Well, that wasn't the case for me because this program I got into actually paid me to go to school. So I was still getting a salary.
Okay, all right. So you gotcha. All right, you
can understand why there was some motivation there, because I could still keep my income while I was working at my schooling. So again, I don't think I would have done it otherwise, but I was fortunate enough to get into that program, and it really helped my situation a lot.
Okay. Well, in that case, then there doesn't seem to be any sort of downside. You get a graduate, you get a doctorate degree, and you don't have to give up the money. Yeah, okay, that's not a problem. That's not a problem.
I'm not saying it was easy though. It was still a struggle for me, and being out of school for that long and then going back, it took a lot of work on my part to get back into it and to really learn the academic way, the way it was at that time. And then of course, just the schoolwork and the research itself was hard work for me. But
yeah, I can understand that, but at least you weren't struggling while broke.
Right, exactly.
That's the full point. Okay, so then you finished the PhD. So what did you do after?
Well, since my research was related to what was then an up and coming technology, additive manufacturing, I really wanted to go in that direction. So what the PhD allowed me to do initially was work as the assistant to our chief scientist in the materials and manufacturing directorate. That's something I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do without a PhD. And that gave me some exposure to things across the lab, and how things worked at a higher level in research. And And so I did that for a 2-year assignment. And then I took a little more initiative to say that I want to get into additive manufacturing and I want to help the Air Force Research Lab get into this technology because it's coming and we need to be prepared. And so I headed up a team to do that within the lab and across the lab. And something that was very exciting because it was a leading edge technology and helped out with many systems that the lab was working on.
All right. Wow, that's pretty interesting. But then you then leave all of that behind, and then you start your own thing, and it was called Her Engineering Career. So what prompted you to strike out on your own and start Her Engineering Career?
Well, it's interesting, Neil, because I actually was at the lab for 31 years. And so I
Oh,
was
wow.
eligible to retire. And I could have worked longer, of course, but it seemed to me that I sort of reached my pinnacle and I couldn't see another opportunity that was intriguing to me. And so I decided I wanted to do something different. I wanted to retire and take the opportunity to do something different. And long story short, I decided I wanted to continue working with women in engineering. And I decided to do that through a coaching approach. So I focus on helping women who have had or are having a similar career as I have had and are going through the same kinds of struggles that I had. And I want to help them stay in engineering, move up in engineering and become the engineers and leaders that they want to be.
Okay. So out of curiosity, the work that you do with the female engineers, what kind of issues do they come in having, and what kind of outcomes do they hope to get after working with you?
Mhm. Well, there's a range of issues, but I would have to say the number one issue is confidence. Um, these women have this, they have all the education and they have all the skills and the strengths, but there are only about 15% of engineers who are women, and it's kind of still a man's world, and the environment that you work in is a little bit stressful, and so many women leave engineering before they get to mid-career. The attrition rate is pretty high. So my goal is to help them with things like confidence. Sometimes they just need a new perspective on how to look at their vision for their career and how to set some goals and accomplish those goals. And then a number of skills also, including speaking skills, also, how to be a leader of a team and how to run meetings and those kinds of things that get you the visibility and the recognition so that you can have a fulfilling career in engineering.
Huh. Okay. You mentioned that an issue that some female engineers have is that the environment in these companies is stressful. So
Mhm.
is it that you work with them in how to manage the stressfulness of these industries or of the companies that they work at, or just figure out whether this is a stress you even want to deal with at all?
Yeah, it's a little of both. One of my other goals eventually is to help companies to improve their work environments so that they aren't so stressful for women and other underrepresented groups. But women can also learn a few ways to cope with that situation. They can learn some ways to help change their situation. And I think it's a little more of a change in perspective to allow them to build their confidence and focus on what they can do rather than what they cannot do. But there's a lot of I'll say minor things um, in the work environment that are little stressors that build up. So I'll give you some examples. One example might be where I worked in the lab. If you're going in to do some experiments and you have to put your lab coat on, and you go to the closet where the lab coats are, and they're all size extra large. Okay. Little things like that are, or if you have to, in my experience, I did a lot of tours of industry and manufacturing lines in different companies. And in some of those, you had to wear safety gear. And so many times I'd get there and there wouldn't be any safety gear for women. It's all for men. So things like that send a message to you that says, oh, well, maybe I'm not welcome here because they don't have what I need to do my job. And those are the kinds of things that you learn about. You learn how to work through them and overcome them, but also try to make changes for the better.
Yeah, and I guess speak up and say, hey, I need a small lab coat.
Exactly.
Extra large ain't gonna work for me. It's a little too baggy. No, yeah. I got you. Okay.
And sometimes just speaking up like that is a hard thing to do.
I understand. So now it's funny you mentioned how to lead teams. So I was listening to a podcast not too long ago, and the woman that was being interviewed, she said that when it comes to leading, she doesn't think that she should have to change the way she wants to lead in order to lead the team, because she says that if she does that, then she's not being her authentic self. But then I also thought to myself, if you're leading a team and the team isn't responding to the way you're leading them, and what good is that? So how can you balance being, I guess, leading the way that you want to lead and also leading the team the way they want to be led?
Yeah, that's tricky. Well, first of all, I'm a firm believer in allowing people to use their own styles and approaches. There seems to be a lot of pushback on that because people think there's one good way to do it and everybody has to follow that good way. And I'm a firm believer in using your authenticity and using the approach that works for you and is effective in getting the outcome that needs to be done. So yes, there's the other part of it that says, this is how I want to do it. But if you're not measuring good outcomes as a result of that, then you need to make some changes too. So it's a tough balance, but I think it is important to maintain your authenticity and to understand that you don't have to do it the way someone else does it just because that's the way someone else does it. You can make changes that align with your style of leadership.
Sure. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, ultimately, it's all based on outcome. And if your approach gets the outcome that is desired, then the way you get it perhaps isn't all that important. It's
That's right.
that you need to be open to changing up your style if you're not getting the outcome that you want. Absolutely.
Yeah, totally agree.
All right. And then I mentioned your podcast in the intro. What's the podcast about, and what do you hope people get from it?
Okay, the Her Engineering Career podcast is designed to complement my coaching business. And so what I do through there is I offer a lot of tips and suggestions and information in any way that can help women along their engineering career. So I did a handful. I just started my podcast around June of this year, so I'm about 6 months into it. And I've included some episodes on specific skills. I've included some episodes on how to own your career and plan ahead. I've done some on work environment and past history of what it's like in the engineering world. But always I try to include some sort of tips or something that the listeners can take away and apply in an easy fashion to their career to make things easier for them and to have a more fulfilling experience.
Excellent. I mean, yeah, and what's wrong? I don't see anything wrong with providing tips that people can take away, especially if they're implementable. It's not all that helpful to give people, information that they can't really use. So if you're if
Yeah,
you're, if you're giving them things that, hey, you can use this tomorrow, and
right.
that's great.
And
Excellent.
these are things that I wish that I had in my career. And so I'm trying to, pay back to help people in the future.
Excellent. You'd mentioned with the work that you do with female engineers, at least a potential component of it is being able to speak well or just speak effectively, especially when you're working at these companies. Is speaking in public something that you've always been good at? And if not, what'd you do to get better at it?
Hmm. I would say when I first, in my early career, I think I was pretty good at transferring information and or data. So, right, this is what you do as an engineer. If you're making a presentation, I have this information to tell you, and you organize it and you tell people. And so I think I learned how to do that through my early education and things like how to write a paper. And I took a public speaking course when I was in college. And then on the job, I learned a lot just about these are the kinds of things that you do to put a presentation together, and then you speak. But I think if you really want, if you want to get a message across that's a little more intriguing or impactful, or you want to convince people, or you want to sell your ideas, or you want to get some support, then you need more than just information transfer, right? So you have to incorporate things like storytelling skills, and you have to put some homework into learning who your audience is and what they want to hear, and you need to own the message. And so those kinds of things I learned on the job as I gained more and more experience. So I would say I was adequate when I started, and I improved as my career went along. And I certainly had many opportunities to give many presentations, even all the way up to the Secretary of Defense. And so I believe I'm much better at it now. I think there's something to be said about learning as you go when you're sitting in presentations and watching a speaker. There's much you can learn, and I did a lot of that.
Excellent. You mentioned something interesting and it's about storytelling, and I'm a big fan of that now too. And it certainly wasn't something I thought about when I first started giving presentations. I didn't even think it was all that appropriate, especially if you're giving a technical presentation. But storytelling is important no matter what type of presentation you give it, especially if you're giving it to people who are outside your field of expertise. I mean, just data transfer, that's not going to work in keeping their attention and keeping them engaged. They're going to fall asleep. And I've seen it
Yes.
happen to me.
Yeah. Yes, totally agree. You have to have a little bit of that human component. You have to have the something in it that's going to allow you to connect to your listener and understand what they're looking for, and giving them something to take away from what you're presenting.
Do you have a process for putting your presentations together? And if so, what is it?
Well, one of my fortes is organization, and I always go for that first. So I like to figure out a little bit about the audience and what they're looking for and what my message is going to be. And then I organize my thoughts around that message. And I spend a lot of time on that because it's a forte of mine, and maybe I'm a little bit of a perfectionist there. And then I think it's from there, it's just going over what you have and taking out all of the parts that you don't need to get your message across, the parts that are going to distract people, the parts that are going to put people to sleep that they don't really care about, right? So there's a lot of that. And then I think there's three things that I think about when I'm going to do a presentation. One is knowing the audience, one is owning your message, and the third is putting that message across in a meaningful way. And if I can feel like I can do that, that keeps my fear level down, keeps my nerves down, and gives me some confidence in what I'm going to present. And then from there, I'll still be a little nervous in many cases. And from there, I'll do things like do a little meditation and do some breathing and maybe say some affirmations, and that kind of thing is what gets me focused and helps me to present a little more clearly.
Okay, I got you. You know, I'm a big fan of visualizing success, and that helps me in allaying my fear or my nervousness as well. Because if you tell you, and especially if you tell yourself that you're not very good at it, you won't be. And
That's exactly right.
so
Yeah.
you gotta get, I guess it's positive self-talk. I think that's
Yeah.
really
You got to
helpful.
do for me, I got to do the Wonder Woman pose. That helps a lot.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, I've heard about that. I'm not doing it though because I'm not trying to be Wonder Woman. Maybe Superman. Superman, maybe.
Yeah,
Not
that'll
Wonder.
work.
And I think what you said also about or figuring out what the audience wants is important too. I know that from my first free presentations when I had to give them. So the whole motivation for me starting Teach the Geek was my struggles in giving presentations in front of senior management. And I used to have to do this on a monthly basis. And those first few presentations were absolutely horrible, Dr. Kinsella. And they were like, I didn't know it was possible to sweat that profusely in front of people, just in general. But the issue that I think I had was just not knowing what they wanted. I would just slap stuff on the slides and get up there and read them and try to get it out there as quickly as possible. But I never got out of there quickly because I oftentimes would get questions afterwards that oftentimes questions I thought I had answered during the presentation, but because I didn't take their needs and wants into account, because I didn't put the presentation in a way that they could take in and understand. Now I'm sitting here, the damn presentation wasn't as long as the question and answer part. You know, it was just, man, it was a hard pill for me to swallow. It was a hard lesson for me to learn, but I learned it eventually.
Yeah, it's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been really great talking to you, Dr. Kinsella. Thank you for being a guest. How can people get in touch with you?
Well, thanks, Neil. This has been great. I'm happy to have joined you today. You can reach me on my website, herengineeringcareer.com. You can also direct email me at mary@herengineeringcareer.com. Or you can find me on LinkedIn.
Excellent. Well, everybody, that marks the end of another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson, founder of Teach the Geek. It's an online platform for science and engineering professionals. Consider checking out the Teach the Geek to Speak Society. It's a monthly membership where you can get ongoing support in your public speaking journey. And you can learn more about it at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Until next time, take care and stay safe. Thank you, Dr. Kinsella.
Thank you, Neil.